He's modest and he's mild. He's a warrior, a fighter, a man living in mind, truth, justice, righteousness, and order. The brother has gone to Ohio State University. I think that's where he got his undergraduate work. I forget where he got his where he got his JD. I forgot that. I mean, the man is already an attorney, but he saw that with that he instructive. He's modest and he's mild. He's a warrior, a fighter, a man living in mind, truth, justice, righteousness, and order. The brother has gone to Ohio State University. I think that's where he got his undergraduate work. I forget where he got his brilliant, and he's instructive. He's modest and he's mild. He's a warrior, a fighter, a man living in mind, truth, justice, righteousness, and order. The brother has gone to Ohio State University. I think that's where he got his undergraduate work. I forget where he got his where he got his JD. I forgot that. I mean, the man is already an attorney, but he saw that with that he could have kept this middle class, white collar with a tie kind of job, but he had more that he wanted to give to his people. And his mentor is Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And after talking with him and consulting with him, he registered and enrolled in the Temple University, or was selected for the PhD program at Temple University. So he's almost completing his PhD. He's a brilliant brother, a man for all seasons. He's absolutely wonderful with the children. The women all love him. You will love him too. We used to call him one of the New Jack Scholars. Now we call him one of the Jehudi Research Project. So I would like to present to some, introduce to others, our brother, soon to be Dr. Greg Kimathi Carr.
Thank you, Queen Mother and Zinga. The driving force and spirit that ASCAC rides the international waves, that's Nzinga Rata Bisha Heru. Let's go ahead. I want to say that it's my honor and distinct privilege to stand before you today and deliver these words of message on the liberation struggle in Ghana and in West Africa from our esteemed elder, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Of course, Dr. Clarke needs no introduction, but for those of us who may be attending ASCAC for the first time from the continent and may not be familiar with Dr. Clarke, I'd like to just say a couple of words. He's well, look at me just messing up. Can I have the permission, please, Mother Franklin, to continue? Thank you, ma'am. All right. Elder Clarke was born in 1915 from Union Springs, Alabama, and then he moved to Columbus, Georgia early in life. Later, as a teenager, he moved to New York. He says he was trying to get to Chicago, but the train ended up getting him some kind of way to New York. So there he came under the tutelage of some of our early warriors, early thinkers, Arthur Schomburg, a brother who was a little bit older than him, but still was his mentor, John Glover Jackson, who nominated him for membership in the Edward Wilmot Blyden Society, which was the old Harlem History Club at the Harlem YMCA. And that's important, certainly for this morning and his message on Ghana, because it was at the Harlem YMCA that he first began to joust verbally with a young student from Ghana, who at that time, and as we understand, talking to the people here in Ghana, particularly the young people, when you ask people their names, sometimes they give you the European name till you press them, and then they give you the birth name. Well, this time, this brother was going by the name of Francis, and of course we know him as Kwame Nkrumah, a young student who would come and visit and spar verbally with these brothers and sisters in the basement of the Harlem YMCA at the Little Theater. And Dr. Clarke talks about Nkrumah being a poor student who would argue with him and just get, that time I think he was studying to come into the ministry, and they would tell him, look man, Africa don't need no more preachers. And he would throw back his head and laugh, and so Dr. Clarke reminisces fondly about those days. Of course, later that brother would go on to become the first Prime Minister of independent Ghana, and he sent for brothers and sisters like John Henrik Clarke, brothers like George Padmore and W.E.B. Du Bois and others. And Dr. Clarke did for a time work here in Ghana, wrote for newspapers. And he has a long history of struggle as our elder, and certainly my teacher, Elder Dr. Jacob Carruthers, has told us, and I guess I can call him elder now, since between last conference and this one, he had his elder ritual, and I think you should recognize that. I believe that was in September 1995. Yes, sir. Brothers is Jedi Shimshu Jehudi. That's the name that became formally his title, the one who listens as a follower of Jehudi. But Dr. Clarke has sent us a message this morning entitled The Liberation Struggle in Ghana and in West Africa. Ghana's and West Africa's uniqueness in the total struggle for African liberation is that this part of Africa has produced a competent literature of liberation, far ahead of that produced in other parts of the African continent. In Ghana, the literature repeatedly reflected the fact that Ghanaians, whether they called their country the Gold Coast or Ghana, were never willing to accept foreigners as their rulers. To some extent, this is also true of Nigeria. In other parts of Africa, had their rebels who used different methods in their liberation struggle, but they did not create a literature comparable to that of Ghana or of Nigeria. In Nigeria, the clearest and most dynamic of this literature was produced by a single man, Nnamdi Azikiwe. In Ghana, starting late in the 19th century and lasting into the middle of the 20th century, many political activists were engaged in producing this literature. George Padmore, a Trinidadian, addressed himself to their predicament in the introduction to his book, The Gold Coast Revolution, where he says, "The purpose of this book is to trace the evolution of Gold Coast nationalism from the foundation of the Ashanti Confederacy to the emergence of the Convention People's Party and after. While political consciousness among the masses is something quite recent, Gold Coast nationalism has deep roots and a long tradition founded in well-established political institutions. Present-day nationalism also draws emotional inspiration from the former Sudanic Empire of Ghana, whence from the 13th century migrated the Akan people to the territories they now occupy. Hence the new name Ghana, which the nationalists have adopted for the Gold Coast. Having their origins in the Western Sudan, the Gold Coast African has been described as a born individualist, virile and irrepressible by nature, who tends to be suspicious of outside influence and intolerant of dictatorial methods in any form. Thanks to their traditional spirit of independence, the Akan were able to evolve a high degree of political cohesion long before they came into contact with European nations. Both the Ashanti and the Fanti branches of the Akan had created well-defined governments and states contemporaneous with the Stuart period in England. And although the hereditary system is recognized in the Gold Coast, democratic principles in the main underlie the traditional principles of this country. This conception of democracy, therefore, is nothing new to Gold Coast Africans. However, in attempting to create a more perfect democracy, Gold Coast nationalist leaders, traditionalists, and reformers are agreed upon conserving the best of their country's political and social institutions and adapting them to the requirements of the 20th century. That's George Padmore from the Gold Coast Revolution. This is a great way to start an African state. But to find the origins of the present state of Ghana, we must look still further back into its history. After the migration and the settlement of the Akan people into the central part of the country, there were a number of minor and major wars between the migrating groups. These wars were finally settled, and a great political reformer brought the the golden stool, to the Ashanti people. Figuratively and symbolically, this stool is their Ark of the Covenant. The Akan people were then the strongest of the organized groups. When the ideological father of present-day Ghana told the assembled friends and former enemies of the Akans that whosoever comes under the Ashanti umbrella and obeys Ashanti law is Ashanti. The thought pattern of tribalism began to give way to the thought pattern of nationhood. The long struggle from the Portuguese named Gold Coast to the presently named Ghana had many propagators, explainers, and detractors. The Portuguese forced their way into the country, and in 1472 built El Nino, first of the large slave-holding fortresses along the coast of Ghana. At that moment in history, Ghanaians began their resistance against European arrogance. This resistance is reflected in a unique and subtle way in King Ansa's speech to a group of Portuguese upon their arrival in the country. K. Budu Akwa, in his small book, Ghana, The Morning After, reports him as saying, I am not insensible to the high honor which your great master, the chief of Portugal, has this day conferred upon me. His friendship I have always endeavored to merit by the strictness of my dealings with the Portuguese and by my constant exertions to procure an immediate lading for your vessels. But never until this day did I observe such a difference in the appearance of his subjects. They have hitherto been meanly attired, were easily contented with the commodity they received, and so far from wishing to continue in this country, were never happy until they could complete their landing and return. Now I remark a strange difference. A great number, richly dressed, are anxious to be allowed to build houses and to continue among us. Men of such eminence, conducted by a commander who, from his own account, seems to have descended from God who made day and night, can never bring themselves to endure the hardships of this climate. Nor would they here be able to procure any of the luxuries that abound in their own country. The passions that are common to us all men will therefore inevitably bring on disputes, and it is far preferable that both our nations should continue on the same footing as they have hitherto done, allowing your ships to come and go as usual. The desire of seeing each other occasionally will preserve peace between us. The sea and the land, being always neighbors, are continually at variance and contending who shall give way. The sea with great violence attempting to subdue the land, and the land with equal abstinence resolving to oppose the sea. This is King Ansa writing to the Portuguese. There was not a single moment during the Europeans' presence when the Africans in Ghana were not aware of the illegitimate nature of their presence. Late in the 19th century, when chattel slavery began to give way to colonialism, a more sophisticated form of slavery, this literature of resistance began to appear. Some of the political activists were missionary-trained ministers of the Christian faith. Some of them were naive enough to think that the European talk of Christian brotherhood was also meant for Africans. When they discovered that most of the missionaries were mercenaries and the handmaidens of colonialism, they developed a special kind of anger against the Christian faith without leaving the Christian faith. They fought to make it more effective and began to use the religion as an instrument of liberation. J.C. DeGraff Johnson gives us a summary of this effort in his introduction to the book Gold Coast Nation and National Consciousness by Reverend S.R.B. Ato-Amah. He calls attention to a then existing condition in the Gold Coast that is not totally absent in the Ghana of today. He starts by asking this question: are our people, our own kith and kin, cultivating a national consciousness, a national conscience, a national affection, national passion, and national vigilance? Have we the outward and visible signs of the inward and spiritual graces of cohesion, concentration, continuity of purpose, and the dynamic of self-sacrifice so highly distinctive of other nations? As a people, we have ceased to be a thinking nation. Our forebears, with all their legitimations and disadvantages, had occasion to originate ideas and to contrive in their own order. They sowed incorruptible thought seeds, and we are reaping a rich harvest today. Though for the most part, we are scarcely conscious of the debt we owe them. Western education, or civilization, undiluted, unsifted, has more or less innovated our our minds and made them passive and Catholic. Our national life is semi-paralyzed. Our mental machinery dislocated, the inevitable consequence being, speaking generally, the resultant production of a race of men and women who think too little and talk too much. But neither garrulity nor loquacity forms an indispensable element in the constitution of a state or of a nation. A later-day Ghanaian, Joseph B. Dankwa, spoke equally as well about the condition in the past and present in books about the national situation in transition. He says, in a Khan society, there is obligation of different sorts. There's obligation in law, imposed upon us by agreement or by legislation, and there is obligation which is not imposed by any written law, but which is more inexorable, namely moral obligation. This means the binding force of what is right or what ought to be done, whether we like it or not, our relation to the supreme good. What is a Khan society? As it used to be, compelled a man to do what was right, or to know what was right, and to avoid what was not right. But the original Khan society did not act according to any Christian conception. In explaining the situation further, Dr. Dankwa gives us the following insight and information. We never had a Christ, or a Buddha, or a Muhammad. Never in the history of the Khan people, so far as we know, have we had what is called a revealed religion, a revelation to or by a prophet, or a duty to a supreme or Lord residing in your heart or residing in heaven, who sits there waiting for you at the end of your life to judge you as either a goat or a sheep, or to send you to paradise or to hell according as you are a sheep or a goat. J.B. Dankwa. Dr. Dankwa has shown us a clear page in the social history of the Akan people of Ghana. He has proven that they, like most Africans, had moral laws and a concept of right and wrong before massive invasions of Africa from Western Asia and subsequently from Europe. He has further proven that Africans were not waiting in darkness for Europeans to arrive and to take them out of savagery, because before the Europeans came there was no savagery. There was an African way of life that Europeans did not understand. They did not have a god of wrath or a devil who burned misbehaviors forever in a fiery furnace. There was a humanity in African life, different from the cruelty of the Europeans, which they imposed on Africans as conquerors. And as conquerors, the Arabs were no exception. They too, like the European, declared on the African way of life because they did not understand it then, and they do not understand it now. What Dr. Dankwa has proven is that the Akan people and African people in general had a concept of their humanity that was over and above any European interpretation. There was an obligation that bound one African to the other, to the extent that wars were held at an absolute minimum, and no war could occur until every avenue of arbitration had been exhausted. No matter what the Europeans call it, an honest human being would be compelled to call it an aspect of a civilized people. Dr. Dankwa concludes his evaluation of Akan societies in his book, The Akan Doctrine of God, by stating, what the Akan take to be good is the family. By this statement, he shows that the Akan, above all else, held the family and the institution of the community to be the supreme good, and that to them the worst vice in life was to bring dishonor or disgrace to the family name or to the community. Dr. Dankwa's comments are not only relevant to the Akan people, but they are relevant to all the African people at home and abroad. Dr. Joseph Dankwa is one of the many giant intellects tragically neglected, who gave us many solutions we have not yet examined or used. In his long career, he was the mentor of a number of African giants, some of whom came before he was well known and some who came after. He was the mentor of the man that I have referred to as the political father of the 20th century Ghanaian politics, writer and activist J.E. Casely Hayford. Kazehaver's literature on the subject of liberation became known for his position that no